שלושתנו שוכבים על הרצפה רועדים, ממש רועדים, ומסתכלים על הדלת ומתפללים שהדלת לא תיפתח, כי אם היא נפתחת אנחנו מתים. ואז התחלתי לראות את המחבלים בהמוניהם, ממש חמישיות, 4, מחפשים אנשים ופשוט יורים בהם במחבואים שלהם בקולות בערבית. וואקף יריות ועת לה, זה כל מה שנפלט לי במוח. לראות אותם פותחים מקררים ויורים בתוך המקררים. כנראה אנשים שהתחבאו שם, אבל אני שומע אותם פשוט מוציאים להורג אנשים שם צעקות וירי שקט, צעקות וירי שקט. יש שם קרוון שאנשים התחבאו שם והם מילאו את הקרוון הזה באש. אתה פשוט כבר משלים עם המוות. אתה אומר אין פה יותר מדי סיכוי.
כך זה נמשך כמעט 6 שעות רצופות. אזרחים ישראלים נרצחו בידי מחבלים בתוך שטח ישראל, מבלי שצה"ל, משטרה או מישהו יגיע לסייע.
הם היו כל כך חופשיים שם, שהם צפצפים אחד לשני וצוחקים אחד עם השני. הכל השתוללות שם כאילו זה שטח שלהם, של המחבלים.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this resolution, not because I am taking sides and picking who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, but I'm looking at this more from the angle of being a United States citizen, an American, and I think resolutions like this really do us great harm. In many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, you know, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
They warned Israel. They had multiple conversations about it. They admitted this. Egyptian buildings in Cairo have raised the Palestinian flag, just like they've done in Iraq, Syria, Iran, Kuwait, and Libya. Also, I found this to be a stunning admission today from Egypt. Egypt's top intelligence officials saying that Israel totally dropped the ball. They ignored huge warning signs that something big was coming from Hamas in Gaza, and they did nothing to stop it. In other words, Egypt says Israel knew this was coming. They warned Israel. They had multiple conversations about it. They admitted this. Israel has arguably the most sophisticated intelligence service in the world, and yet they purposefully didn't do anything to stop it. Egypt says they knew about it. So if that's true, why would they do that? Why would Israel ignore a potential attack?
Hello, this is a dot connector to wade through the deceit, the diversions, the cul-de-sacs, the lies surrounding what is currently happening in Israel. And of course, you won't get this information in the mainstream media. In fact, from what I've seen in the last 24 hours, you won't get it from some of the, quote, big names in the so-called alternative media. What is the case again? It always is with every war, is that civilians on both sides are being slaughtered. Always the case, while those that order the slaughtering stay in a safe place. When Iraqi civilians were being slaughtered with the invasion of Iraq by America and Britain, where were Boy George Bush and Tony Blair? Where were they while it was all going on? Sipping coffee in the White House and Downing Street. It's always the way. And we have Netanyahu sitting here now pontificating. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. You, mate, are doing nothing. You're sending others to do it like you always do. And the same goes for that which is really behind. Not the window dressing, what is really behind what is known as Hamas. So, first of all, the bottom line. This was not a surprise attack. Oh yeah, well, they surprised us. Oh really? Who do you think you're talking to? Bloody idiots? We have the Israeli Defense Forces as one of the most trained and best equipped armies in the world. And we're talking about a very small area in terms of Israel, Gaza. We have Mossad, one of the most sophisticated and widespread intelligence agencies in the world that make surveillance an art form. It's on the cutting edge. It knows everything that's going on in that area. But somehow, hundreds of Hamas, quote, militants laid siege to Israel, put thousands of rockets into Israel, which they somehow gathered or built or whatever, without Mossad and the IDF having any idea. Oh no, we didn't know about that. We had Hamas operatives coming into Israel on frickin' hang gliders. But they never knew it was coming. We had fighting in all these different areas of Israel, these different locations. But the IDF and Mossad and all the rest of that vast Israeli security network had no idea. Isn't that what they said with 9/11? I'm hearing them saying this is Israel's 9/11. Well, what happened on 9/11? These planes were, they say, hijacked, and there was a big build up to it, they say, preparing for it. But the whole of the American intelligence military network, oh no, it's a surprise, we didn't know. To say they are lying to you is to state the bloody obvious, and we'll get into why. This is a quote from a former IDF soldier who was a border observer, and she worked with the highest level technology available. That's what Israel does. And this is what she said: if a bird came close, we knew. Even a cockroach came to our fence border, we knew. How did 400 Hamas pass through today? The answer is they were allowed to. Was this a surprise attack for the civilian population of Israel? Oh yes, of course. Was it even a surprise attack for many in the rank and file of the military? But the inner core that's running the show, surprise to them? You must be bloody joking. And this situation reminded me of someone I've quoted over the years in the books, over the decades. It's a man called Leroy Fletcher Prouty. He served as Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Kennedy, JFK. He was a colonel in the United States Air Force and subsequently became a critic of US foreign policy, particularly the covert activities of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, which he believed was working on behalf of a secret world elite. This is in the 1960s and after. The very world elite I've been uncovering for now 34 years, my 34th year of doing it. And this is the telling quote that I've used a number of times in the books. Fletcher Prouty said, "No one has to direct an assassination, it happens. And for assassination, that means an attack like the one in Israel now as well. No one has to direct an assassination, it happens. The active role is played secretly by permitting it to happen. This is the greatest single clue," he said, "who has the power to call off or reduce the usual security precautions." Who has that power in Israel must now come under the spotlight and be questioned why they did so. Because they obviously did. Now, what they want you to do in any situation like this is to take sides. And if I'm going to take the side of anyone, I take the side of the civilians in Israel who have been subject to these horrors that continue, and the civilians in Gaza who are now suffering the horrors of the Israeli response. But in terms of sides, one fighting the other, to take either is to lose the plot. Because I've been exposing for decades now and been called anti-Semitic for it, even though it's the opposite. I've been exposing a cult. There's a global cult, and there is a major aspect of it which is called the Sabbatean cult. The Sabbatean cult goes back to the 1600s. I've detailed it all in the books, but basically it is a grouping, a satanic grouping that is expert in posing as what it's not. So they might pose as Islamic leaders. They might pose as Vatican leaders. Or they might and have mercilessly for the Jewish people in general. They might and have posed as Jewish leaders. It was this Sabbatean cult, with the Rothschilds very much involved, who were responsible for the creation of Israel in 1948. And the horrors matching what's happened now and more. So when you look at what's happening now, and the horrors of what has been imposed upon Jewish civilians, we should not take sides. Because when you get to the core of what's controlling this side and what's controlling that side, ultimately, you're looking at the same people. And Sabbateans, who have been the controllers of Israel from the start, and then moved in on places like America, they, irony of ironies, hate Jewish people. They have contempt for them. And I've been saying all these years that in the end, this Sabbatean cult is gonna throw the Jewish people in general under a colossal bus. And we are now, as I speak, seeing that happen. All the Jewish population of Israel have got to contemplate is how they were treated during the so-called pandemic, fake pandemic, and how they were forced in many and various ways to get the fake COVID vaccine, which has killed and maimed so many in its wake. They don't care about you, Jewish people of Israel and the wider world. The Sabbatean cult has infiltrated you. It does not care about you. And that's why it's allowed this to happen. For ulterior motives we will get into. And at the same time, this global cult, as I call it, is behind Hamas. If you want to bring two groups of people into conflict with each other, then control both sides, and it's a doddle. And the people who are the civilians taking the consequences of that think, well, they're against me and I'm against them, but actually, ultimately, the same hands are on the tiller of both sides. This is how the world works, and we're seeing a blatant example of it now. Just look at the history of Hamas, and you will see how much influence, fundamental influence in its creation, came from the Israeli government. So Hamas is hanging the Palestinian civilians out to dry, and the same is happening with the government of Israel and Israeli civilians.
ראש השב"כ אומר לאבו מאזן, אתה לא יכול ללכת לבחירות עם חמאס. אבו מאזן משיב לו, אני לא עובד אצלך, אני קובע אם יש בחירות או לא, ולא אף אחד אחר. ראש השב"כ אומר לו, אבל חמאס עלול לנצח בבחירות האלה. אבו מאזן משיב לארגמן, אתה אומר את זה לי? מי בנה את חמאס? מי מעביר לחמאס כל חודש $30 מיליון? אתם, ישראל, הרי בניתם את חמאס.